All right, welcome back to another episode. So this episode is going to be a little bit lengthy and it will be a little bit tricky because we're going to need to fetch data from the backend, all of the guild band logs, and we're going to have to format it in a way so that we can, we not format, but prepare it in a way so that we can just pass it into chart.js and we can easily render it out. So essentially, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up the analytics page. So what we're going to have to do is we're actually going to create a new section in our categories page that's going to allow the user to visit the analytics page. Because remember, we cannot manually type in the URL and visit it because we need to select a guild and then we can actually navigate through the entire application. Because if there's no guild selected, it won't allow us to actually get to the page that we want. Okay, so let's first create a page called guild analytics page, and I'm in the React application right now. Okay, guild analytics page, and we'll go ahead and create the component. Have it return a simple div, and then we're going to go ahead and go inside the app.tsx file, and we're going to go ahead and add a route for this page. And for the element, let me zoom in a little bit. It's just going to be guild analytics page. We'll auto import that. Not auto import, but we'll import that. There we go. Okay, so like I said, if we try to visit this page right now, it's going to redirect us back to the menu page. That's because the way we have it set up is if you don't have a guild selected through the menu, it's going to redirect you back to the menu page. Okay, if you actually want it to, if you want to make it so that you can actually visit the page without having to select the guild, you'll need to get the guild ID either in the route or you have to save it inside something like local storage, for example. But I think this is a lot better because we don't have to perform any kind of validation to see if the user's actually in the guild or to see if the user's actually or to see if the user's actually like if they have the actual permissions to see the guild, to manage the guild, that is. So let's go inside the let's see, not guild, category page. I'm gonna go ahead and just copy everything from this div down here. Okay, I'm just gonna copy that and paste this over here. I'm gonna change up the title. I'm gonna call this guild information. I'm gonna remove this text button over here and just change it to analytics. So you're gonna see on the category page we just have analytics. So when we click on this analytics button over here, it's gonna navigate us to the analytics page like this. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and do one more thing. I'm going to copy this line over here and just add it to this div that holds the basic configuration section. So that way we have the border on the top and then we have some margin as well. All right, so I think that's good enough for now. So now we can change the icon later. I'll leave it alone for now. So what we need to do is we need to go inside the guild analytics page and we need to go ahead and fetch the data from the API. So inside the guild analytics page, let me actually close this real quick. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call the use effect hook. Okay, and I'm not going to create a custom hook right now. We'll just do everything inside the use effect hook inside this guild analytics page. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fetch the API for all of the guild configurations. Or not guild configurations, the guild bands, the guild band logs. So we're going to create a function inside the api.ts file called get guild band logs. And we're going to need a couple parameters. We're going to need the guild ID, of course. And then we're going to need the from dates. Okay. So this from date is going to be a query parameter. So we're going to, axios.get API URL. And then the URL, the path is going to be /guilds, the guild ID, /bands, and then query string. Let me zoom in a little bit more. From date equals, and then from date, just like that. And we're going to pass in the Axios config as well. Now we have to find up here. Okay, so that's literally all this get guild band logs is going to do. It's just going to fetch the endpoint with the correct query parameter. I am going to type annotate this API call so that way we have IntelliSense So I'm going to go inside types.ts, and I'm going to go ahead and create a guild ban logs type. So export type guild ban logs type, and I'm going to go ahead and just literally, it's going to be the same exact properties that we have from the type ORM entity. So the ID, the guild ID, the band member ID, issued by, string, issued on, which is a date, and then reason, which is nullable, or a string, or undefined or a string. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the API.ts file. We're going to have a pair of angle brackets, and then guild ban logs type, and then square brackets. So this means that this endpoint is going to return an array of guild ban logs, okay, or guild ban logs type. So when we call this and when we handle the resolve value, we can actually type annotate, well, not type annotate, we can actually reference all of the properties, okay, with IntelliSense, that is, because we're using TypeScript. So let's go back to the guild analytics page, and let's go ahead and call, get guild ban logs, and we're going to pass in the guild ID as well as the from date parameter. So to get the guild ID, we can do that by consuming the context like we have done many times. So get the guild right there, and we got to get the guild ID. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a variable called guild ID, and we're going to do guild and guild.id or empty string. So basically, if the guild for whatever reason is undefined, it's just going to, this guild ID value is going to be an empty string. Okay, so now that we have the guild ID, we need the from date parameter. So how do we get the from date parameter? Well, that's pretty straightforward. The from date parameter is when we should start fetching all the records from. So today's the 10th, and we want to fetch all the records on January 4th all the way up until today. Okay, so because if you include today, it's going to be all the way from January 4th. So what we can do is we can do const current date, new date, and I'm actually going to need current date at some point again, but I'll leave it like this for now. What I'll do is current date dot set date, and then what we'll do is we will call current date dot get date, subtract it by 6. And the reason why we subtract by 6 is because this is going to, if we subtract it by 7, it's going to land on the 3rd, right? 10 minus 7 is 3, but that's going to give us a total of 8 records, and we only want 7, right? So we need, because we're including the current present date, so that's how we subtract it by 6. Okay, and now we can create a variable called from date, and this will just be current date dot to local date string. All right, and then that's pretty much it. So if I were to console log from date, you're going to see that's going to, let me actually comment this out. Let me go to the analytics page. You're going to see that it says January 4th, 2022. Okay, so that's okay. And all we got to do is literally just pass in from date as a parameter. Let's see what's going on here. Why is it saying this? Oh, you know why? It's probably because of the type. I'm going to change this to a string. There we go. Okay. So now let's go ahead and handle the promise. What's going on with my... Whoa. So let's console log the data first so we can see what the data looks like. Okay, there we go. Oh, I had tab moves focus. That's why it was giving me some issues. Okay. So if I go into my console, you can see that we have all of the records being fetched from the database. And you can see that there's 30 records, which is the actual number from January 4th all the way up until today. Now, to prove to you that this actually works, if I were to change this to 3, for example, you can see that it now gives me 12. And this is going to give me everything from the 7th all the way up until the 10th. Okay, it's not sorted, but you can go ahead and see that it's not going to give us anything before the 7th at all. You can see that everything is just the 10th, nothing from the 7th. Okay, so cool. So whatever the current date is, subtract 6, get us all the records between that range. Okay, so now what do we do next from here? Well, now that we've gotten the actual records, we need to prepare the data so that way we can actually pass it into the chart.js library and it can render just fine. But the first thing that we'll need to do is get all of the labels, and the labels are pretty much, let me show you. The labels are pretty much this right over here. You can see where it says January, February, March, April. These are the labels. So for our labels, we're going to need the actual dates. So for example, January 4th, January 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. So we're going to need those as our labels. So how do we get that? Well, let's do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called getLabels. This function is going to go ahead and just give us all of the labels in an array in ascending order. So first thing we'll do is we'll create a new date object. We're going to go ahead and get the last date, which is today. So const last is equal to current date dot gets date. And then we're going to go ahead and get the starting date, which is the 4th. So we can just do last subtract 6. Okay. And we're going to create an array called labels. And the reason why we're doing all of this is because what we're going to do is we're going to loop from start all the way until last. We're going to go ahead and update the date object, current date, and we're going to go ahead and build the date string. Okay, so for let I equal start, I is less than or equal to last, and then I plus plus. So we're starting from the 4th because today's the 10th, right? So 10 minus 6 is 4. Okay, so when I is equal to 4, we're going to go ahead and set the current date to I, whatever the current value of I is, right? And we're going to do labels.push, and we're going to do current date.getMonth plus 1. The reason why we're adding 1 is because when we call getMonth, remember getMonth is 0 index, it starts at 0. So if the month is January, getMonth returns a number, and that number is going to be 0. If the month is February, it will be 1. If the month is March, it'll be 2. If the month is April, it will be 3, and so on and so forth. So we got to add 1. Actually, no, not 1 over here. Sorry. We got to add 1 over here. And then we're going to add a slash, and then current date, get date, just like that. Okay, so this will literally build the month and date string for us because there's no method that can give us the actual month with the date. It will always give us, it'll give us the year or some other stuff that we don't need. So this is better. I mean, you could just do, like, there's the method that you can call. I think it's toLocalDateString. Yeah, we can just call this method. But that'll include the year. And I don't really think we want the year. I mean, you could, but I don't want the year. So I'll do this instead. Okay? And we'll just return labels. Whoops. We'll return labels. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and call getLabels, and you're going to see, or let me not do that. Let me actually console log this. And you're going to see in the console, we have an array of all of the labels. So January 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, which is a total of 7. Okay? And now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to have to prepare the data in a way that for every single element inside our label, so for example, January 4th, right? The data for January 4th is going to be in the same position that its label is in, right? So you can see that January 4th is at position 0. So the data for January 4th, which is just the number of records on January 4th, the number of guild band logs that was created on January 4th, it's going to be in the 0th position in that array. Okay, I know it might be a little bit tricky, but once you actually see the actual implementation, it'll make a little bit more sense. Okay, so if you actually look at chart.js, it'll make a lot more sense as well, because I'm literally just following what they do in chart.js. Okay, for every single label, data is an array as well, right? And the data, the elements inside data, the positions correspond to the positions for label. So January is going to correspond to 0, February is going to correspond to 10, and etc., etc. Okay, and that's just based off of the documentation. Okay, so what we got to do is we have to get all of the guild band logs inside an array, the number of guild band logs inside an array, and they need to match the label's positions. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement a function, and I'll call this const. I'll call this prepare data. This is going to take in the data that we fetch from the API. So we're going to call prepare data, and I'll console log it for now. Okay, and I'm going to pass in data right here. Okay, so what we're going to do inside this function is we're going to get the current date, of course, and we're going to have to get the last and the start. So I'm just going to copy this up here. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and create another variable called data records, because we are going to return an array. Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and also loop as well. So we're gonna loop from start all the way until last. Okay, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna basically need to go through all of the data records that, wait, what's going on here? Oh, whoops, let I equals start. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through this data array, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through this data array. We're going to check to see if the date matches, I. Okay, so for example, I is going to be 4, right? And 4 represents January 4th. Okay, and in our data array, in our array of guild band logs type, there are some records that have a date of January 4th, right? So we're going to have to compare the date to see if they match, and if they match, we're going to return all of those, okay? And that's going to give us back an array of all of the records that were issued on January 4th. And then we're going to just get the length of that array, which is going to represent the number of records that were created, the number of the guild bands that were issued on that date. And we're just going to add it to the data records array, and we're going to return it. So what we're going to do, create a variable called records, called data.filter, right? And for every single band log, I'll just call this band log, we need to create a new date from bandlog.issuedOn. The reason why is because if we try to reference bandlog.issuedOn without creating a new date, because when we fetched the data, it didn't serialize it properly. So if we try to call bandlog.issuedOn get date, it's actually going to throw an error. So we need to change this to a date object. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and call get date. So this is going to give us, for example, if it's going to give us 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. Okay, so if it's equal to I, which I is the current date that we're trying to compare to. So if it's equal to I, then we're going to return it to this records array. Okay, records is going to be an array of n elements, and n elements is going to represent the number of guild band logs that were created on that day, which also means the number of bands that were issued on that day. Okay, so we can just do data records.push, records.length, and then we can just return data records. Okay, so let's explain a little bit about what's going on, because I know it can be a little bit confusing. So the reason why we're looping is because we need to start from January 4th, or whatever the first date that we're trying to start from is. So today's January 10th. So that means the start date, the from date parameter was January 4th. So we have records from January 4th all the way up until today, January 10th. Okay, so we're starting on the number 4. So I equals start. Start is currently 4. Okay, and we're ending on the value of last, which is 10. So the total number of iterations is going to be 7, because 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a total of 7 iterations, right? Because we're doing I less than or equal to last. Okay, so what we do first is we call data.filter, and what this will do is this will literally just filter out all of the guilds, or I'm sorry, not the guilds, all of the data, which our data is a guild band log type. And what we're doing is we're comparing the current record's date, right? So if the current record is, let's say for example, the current record is this, and you can see that the issued on the date is January 10th. Well, in the first iteration, the value of I is 4. Okay, so this is obviously not going to give us the correct data. Okay, well, not the correct, I'm sorry, let me phrase that. This is not going to give us the value for January 4th, so it skips that. Okay, now if there's no records for January 4th, this records array is going to be 0. So what we do is we call data records.push records.length, which is just 0, and 0 is going to be added to the first position for data records, and that first position needs to correspond to January 4th, which January 4th as a label is the first position inside the labels array. Remember what I said earlier, that the position for labels needs to correspond to the position for the data array? And so that's what's happening right over here. So the position for January 5th for the labels is the second position inside the labels array. So the next iteration is I equals 5, right? So I is currently 5. We compare the dates. If there are any records, let's say if there's 5 records for January 5th, well, for the second element for data records, it's going to be 5. And we keep doing that until there's no more records. And then we pretty much have all of the corresponding values for each date, for each label. So if we were to look in the array now, you can see that we have 1, 10, 7, 0, 1, 2, 9. So this is 11, 18, 19, 21, 30. And that seems about right. Okay. So now that we have all of the labels, we have all of the values. We can now actually start to use chart.js to populate the chart. So I know, like I said, this is a little bit tricky. It's a little bit confusing, but that's pretty much this is pretty much kind of like a brute force way. I'm sure there's probably a better way that we can do this, but if you can think of a better way, definitely let me know. But now that we have all the data set up, so one thing that I'll mention is that this will work great if it's a 7-day span, right? If you're doing it with 30 days, I think it will still work fine, even if it was 30 days, because you could do something like last minus 30, for example, but it would just increase the amount of iterations. Okay, and it could be a lot slower because the reason why I don't really like this specific for loop is because this is an O of 2 time complexity, because when you're filtering, it's going to go through every single element in the array. There's probably a better way where you can use a map, but I'll probably save that for another video or let you guys figure it out. But I don't want to prolong this video at all. So in the next episode, what we'll do is we'll install chart.js for our React project. And we're going to go ahead and take the data and then modify the chart to actually fit our needs. So I'll see you all in the next episode. Peace out.